I should have listened when the locals told me not to stay after dark, but I thought they were exaggerating. They spoke with a seriousness that didn't match the peaceful look of the place, as if the land itself carried a memory they didn't want to relive. I laughed it off until the night came, and by then, it was already too late. Everyone in the nearby town knew about the mansion, but people avoided speaking its name directly. They acted like repeating it might invite something unwanted into the conversation. Even the bravest hunters refused to camp anywhere near the property. I wasn't trying to be reckless, just curious, because every story I heard about the mansion made it sound like a test of courage. Some people claimed to see lights in the broken windows long after the power was cut, while others swore they heard piano notes floating across the lake. I wanted to see for myself whether any part of those stories was true. The locals gave me directions reluctantly, reminding me more than once to turn back before sunset. They looked genuinely afraid, not of me going missing, but of something not right waking up at night. They only relaxed when I promised I'd leave before dark, a promise I immediately planned to break. The mansion didn't look like a place where horror belonged when I first saw it through the trees. It was just stone, broken wood, and vines twisting through windows that had lost their glass decades ago. I walked through the front doorway, which no longer had a door, feeling like I was stepping into someone else's memory. The air inside was much colder than it had been outside, almost unnaturally so. It felt like walking into a room where someone had just argued, the tension clinging to the air like humidity. I told myself it was only the shade and the stone absorbing the day's cold. I set up my small camp in what used to be the living room, laying out a sleeping bag where the fireplace once stood. The floor was uneven and dusty, but the space felt open enough to see anything coming toward me. I wanted control, or at least the illusion of it. Right away, I noticed something odd about the silence inside the mansion. Outside, I could hear the rustling of leaves and distant birds, but inside, everything was painfully still. It felt like the walls swallowed any sound before it reached my ears. I explored the rooms, taking slow steps through the remains of hallways that twisted into each other like a maze. There were scorch marks on the ceilings and remnants of wallpaper curled like old skin. Every room felt recently abandoned despite decades of decay. I stopped at a doorframe that led to the basement stairs, or what was left of them. The wooden steps had collapsed into darkness, leaving a jagged pit that seemed to breathe cold air upward. I felt something rise from that darkness, not warm, not alive, just present. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, even though I couldn't see anything. It felt like whatever was below had noticed me. I backed away slowly, unwilling to turn my back to the shadows. The sun began to lower behind the trees, and the house grew more restless as the light faded. The cold in the rooms deepened, moving like a slow tide through the broken corridors. I felt watched long before night arrived. I lit a lantern as the last traces of daylight disappeared from the windows. Its glow pushed the darkness back only a little, leaving most of the corners untouched and thick. It made me uneasy, knowing how much the lantern couldn't reach. I sat down on my sleeping bag, listening to the shifting of the old walls as the temperature dropped. Then I heard something that froze my breath halfway out of my lungs. It was soft at first, a gentle tapping on the far end of the hallway. The taps were too slow to be an animal, and too deliberate to be the house settling. They came in pairs, almost like footsteps that didn't fully lift off the ground. I felt each sound reverberate through my chest, like a warning. My instinct told me to get up and run, but curiosity pinned me to the floor. I lifted the lantern and slowly aimed it down the hallway. The shadows seemed to shift in the light, pulling back from the glow like they were alive. I waited, heart pounding in my throat, hoping the noise would stop and prove I was imagining things. Instead, the tapping grew louder and closer. Whatever was moving didn't care that I knew it was there. I called out softly, more to reassure myself than anything else. My voice felt foreign in that house, as if speaking disturbed something that preferred silence. The tapping stopped instantly, which somehow terrified me more. For a long moment, nothing moved. The mansion returned to its heavy, suffocating quiet. I could feel the darkness thickening, as if it were leaning in. Suddenly, from somewhere deeper in the house, a single piano note echoed through the halls. It was so sharp and so clear that it felt like someone struck the key right beside me. My skin crawled as the sound lingered unnaturally long. Another note followed, slower and heavier, almost like a deliberate warning. The sound didn't match the broken, dust-covered piano I saw earlier on the far side of the house. No living person could have made those notes. I grabbed my lantern and took a step toward the sound, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. The house shifted again as I moved, groaning softly like a deep breath taken through the walls. The air tasted like metal, cold and sharp. As I approached the old music room, the piano fell silent. My lantern flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the floor like they were reaching toward me. Something stood in the far corner of the room, hunched and unmoving. The shape was too tall to be human, its outline bending in a way that made the silhouette look unnatural. It didn't step forward or retreat. It just watched me with an attention that felt suffocating. I could feel its gaze press against my skin like ice. When I stepped back, the shadow stepped forward, not with sound, not with a footstep, but with a shifting of darkness that moved like liquid. I turned and ran before I could convince myself it was a trick of the light. I sprinted back toward the front of the house, and behind me, something began moving. It wasn't footsteps, but a sliding, scraping sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. The noise grew faster the more I ran. My lantern flickered violently, threatening to go out completely as I stumbled through the entry hall. When I reached the doorway, the coldness behind me surged like a wave, pushing me forward. I didn't stop to look back. I burst into the night air, gasping like I had been underwater. The forest outside was silent, far too silent, as if even the trees were holding their breath. I ran until the mansion was no longer visible through the trees. When I finally stopped, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Behind me, the mansion seemed to stand taller in the darkness, as if watching me leave. I knew instantly that whatever lived in that house hadn't wanted me there, but it also didn't want me to leave unharmed. A low sound drifted through the trees, so faint I almost believed it was imagined. It was the same piano note I heard inside, only now it was slower, drawn out, almost taunting. The cold air around me tightened as if something unseen brushed past my shoulder. I sprinted through the woods without stopping or looking back, guided only by the faint beam of my lantern and pure fear. Branches snapped beneath my feet, and every sound felt like something closing in behind me. The darkness seemed to run with me, matching my steps. By the time I reached the edge of the forest road, the lantern finally died. I didn't dare wait in the dark, so I kept running until the first streetlight flickered into view near town. Only then did the pressure in the air lift enough for me to breathe normally. None of the locals were surprised when they saw me return before dawn. They exchanged knowing glances, saying nothing, but their silence spoke louder than words. They had all expected me to return shaken. I didn't tell them the full story, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think they needed to hear it again. They already knew what lived in that house, or at least they knew enough to stay away. They simply nodded and told me never to go back. Sometimes at night, I still hear that single piano note echoing in my dreams. It comes the same way it did from the mansion, slow, cold, and impossibly clear. Each time it plays, I wake with the same suffocating fear I felt inside those walls. I've never gone back, and I never will. Whatever hunts those empty rooms is still waiting for someone foolish enough to stay the night. And I know one thing with absolute certainty. It didn't want me to survive.